Like my website just went up like last summer, right? And so now here we are, just a few months into, my journey. And I'm already kind of regarded as a grizzled veteran within the space, right? I'm kind of like a go-to person that people talk to. I speak on panels and things like that.
Welcome back to the Clean Techies podcast, where we interview climate tech founders and VCs to discuss all things building and investing to solve the biggest challenge of our generation, climate change. Today we are joined by the founder of Oceanid MRV, Ben Swainbank. For context, carbon capture and the measurement of how much is captured is something pretty well solved in forestry and direct air capture. However, for oceanic capture, it is not. This presents a big dilemma, as oceanic carbon capture is widely regarded as the most scalable method to pull carbon out of the air at a gigaton scale. Ben today talks to us about how he and his team are working on formalizing and certifying the amount and quality of carbon captured through such oceanic projects. This conversation was super helpful for understanding why oceanic pathways are important, as well as the challenges of measuring the work done in a manner that is accurate and sufficient to certify. An interesting takeaway from this episode is how Ben, as a non-scientist, is building a company in a scientific space, but is doing it by surrounding himself with a team of oceanographers and then bringing together the science and the commercial side of things. Early on in the show, we also talked through the steps he took to decide if this was a space he should go deeper on. This is a very helpful framework for any aspiring climate tech founders. So generally speaking, really interesting episode with Ben, and we hope you enjoy today's episode. All right, welcome to the show, Ben. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks, Silas.
Great to have you on. Obviously, we've had the chance to speak prior to this, so excited to learn more and share what you're doing with the audience. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up getting into doing what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. So I'm here in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and I've spent my background working in small technology companies here, typically early hire, across a variety of industries. And a couple of years ago, I read the David Wallace Wells book, The Uninhabitable Earth, and I had never really been a very committed environmentalist prior to that. I've certainly been aware of the problem, but that really kind of switched me on, saying, okay, this is the fundamental challenge of our time. I have nothing better to do with my time and my talents. And so really that got me to shift in my thinking and got me thinking, all right, I want to work in climate. How am I going to do that? And so I began to kind of explore the space, and I explored a variety of kind of different avenues and opportunities, looked to join a few companies. Everything quite clicked there. At one point, I was looking to start up a nonprofit, but that didn't quite get off the ground. But as I was exploring the space, I became very interested in the CDR industry in particular, right? Climate itself is vast, but the CDR, which is atmospheric carbon dioxide removal. So this is kind of the group of people that are trying to, at scale, remove billions of tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, kind of run the entire emissions fossil fuel industry in reverse, right? And so I became very interested in that industry, and it really seems like an opportunity for a small group to have a very big impact. It's just a very exciting space. And as I was exploring that space and thinking about, all right, what's interesting, where can I apply myself, I became very interested in the marine pathways. And so these are things like growing tons and tons of biomass and sinking it to the depth, like kelp or phytoplankton. You could be doing direct ocean capture, where you're sucking the carbon directly to the air, or changing the ocean chemistry, a variety of ways to do it. But as I was thinking of, like, all right, how can we do this? Like, what could possibly work at this kind of multi-gigaton scale? If we kind of begin at the end, or like, hey, we've done it, we've defeated climate change, or at least kind of done a good job of combating it. What does that world look like? And within that, I think the pathways that were most compelling to me were these marine pathways. That's kind of where I think, all right, this is how it's probably possible, or at least most interesting. But as I was talking to different organizations that are working in these pathways, there's kind of this reoccurring theme of okay, this has enormous potential, but like, how do we know? Do we know it's real? How well established is the science? But then also, even if you can do it, or you're confident that you can do it, can you prove it, right? Because that's a fundamental issue within all of CDR. Your product is this proof of sequestration. And in both cases, the answer would often be, well, we don't know, or, we've got reason to believe think this works, but exactly how we'll measure it, like, we don't really know yet. And so be kind of frequently confronted with a case of like, all right, here's this pathway, this possibility that could have a major impact on the fundamental challenge of our time, but also, might not work at all. It might be, it might not be something you can measure that you can figure out. And so, but that's like a really interesting challenge, right? Well, let's get the answer to that. Like, is this a waste of time, or is this really important? And how do we figure out? And so that really kind of drove me in the direction of forming, an Ocean MRV company, where we can work with across all of these different pathways, build our own internal expertise across all of them, begin to kind of write these rule books and develop, both commercially viable and scientifically sound methodologies to verify these things, and in doing so, we want to be like kind of a catalytic role within the marketplace, really stimulate marine, so kind of the supply side of marine carbon dioxide removal. And so that's kind of the premise on which Oceanid ID was formed. Oceanid MRV was formed, and so that's kind of the lines we've been proceeding along. So that really the company itself really only kicked off last summer, and so we've been, we're still relatively new within the industry, but there's kind of a lot of people definitely kind of see a clear need for somebody to be playing this role, and so it's a very exciting time to be kind of up and running and working in this space.
Mm-hmm. Hey there. Quick break to remind any founders or VCs listening, if you are looking for deal flow, seeking to raise funding, looking for partners to help service your needs, or perhaps you're looking for corporate investment partners, feel free to reach out to us through our Slack channel, which can be found in the description. Because we meet a lot of people in this space, we set aside time each week to make introductions to the various people that we encounter. This is something we do free of charge in order to help these incredible companies solving climate change to scale. Looking forward to hearing from you in the Slack channel. Yeah, I guess before we get into kind of how you're building the company, I'd be keen to have you walk us through. You mentioned that there's various types of pathways people look at, especially in regards to the ocean. What are some of the kind of mainstream ones, if you will? Could you walk us through the basics of those and how they work, like you're explaining it to your grandma or something?
Yeah, sure. I'll actually back up a little bit and talk about CDR in general, because I think how marine kind of fits into it is important, right? So I put the CDR industry in kind of three buckets, right? And the first bucket is all things tree, essentially. And it is kind of inherently a little problematic, or at least as I see it, right? You're either planting a new tree today, a bunch of new trees, and there's either going to be a number of years before they grow to maturity, and are you confident that it'll be there within 30 years or 50 years, right? And if it's not, if it burns down or is cut down, then you've essentially reversed all your efforts. You've accomplished nothing. Or you're not planting a new tree, in which case, well, what exactly are you doing, right? And so we definitely kind of want afforestation efforts to be successful. We're very supportive of them, but also want to see those efforts going forward, but also see them as kind of inherently problematic. That's kind of one end of the spectrum, right? The other end of kind of the quality spectrum within CDR are things like direct air capture and biochar, where are very high durability, obvious additionality. You're clearly doing something, you're clearly getting it out of the air, and the MRV, the verification aspect of it, is relatively straightforward. So you've done it, you've captured it, you can measure it, and you can prove it. And so really there, in both of those cases, it's really largely a matter of capacity. Okay, so those are the kind of the two ends of the spectrum. And then in the middle, we have basically all things, mainly the marine pathways, but some pathways like enhanced rock weathering kind of fall into this bucket as well. And so these are cases where we see enormous potential. We've got great kind of additionality and durability stories. In other words, you really are doing something, and you really can be confident that's being removed from the atmosphere for centuries and more. But it's hard to prove. And so that's kind of the area that we're operating in. Those are kind of the set of problems that we are trying to solve. And so within the marine pathways, some of the big ones are biomass. So you might grow a bunch of kelp, and it could be a nearshore operation, but you're going to deliver it to depth and sink it, right? But there are also people doing things like encountering wild sargassum belts and trying to sink those, and taking that biomass, and as well as kind of getting rid of that hazard, and sequestering that biomass. So yeah, various ways of sinking ocean biomass is one. Another one is direct ocean capture, when you're literally, very much like direct air capture. You're sucking the carbon out of the water directly. And because the concentration of carbon within the water is an order of magnitude beyond the concentration of carbon in the air, there's some advantages to doing it that way. And then you're kind of releasing the water. And then there's and another one is ocean enhanced alkalinity, in which you're changing the chemical composition of the ocean, or the sea waters, such that it increases its carbon uptake as well. It kind of mineralizes carbon and draws down that way, just by changing the ocean chemistry. It's a natural phenomenon that's already occurring, and we're accelerating it. But then all of these problems, all of these pathways have a challenge in that what they're doing is removing carbon from the water, which is not really what we care about. We care about removing carbon from the air. And there is a principle where there's an air-sea equilibrium exchange that happens, and if that water stays near the surface, it's going to kind of draw carbon from the air at roughly a 1-to-1 ratio. But you definitely have to be very mindful of that there are circumstances which it doesn't occur. If it doesn't stay near the surface over the course of weeks and months, then this equilibrium effect does not happen. And so that's certainly one of the challenges that in addition to a variety of other challenges, in terms of verifying these marine pathways, that's kind of a fundamental one that they all kind of share in common.
Mm-hmm. Okay, another thing I want to ask, and I feel like you can help us understand this, is we can compare maybe some of because let's try to back this up. You said that understanding how much and verifying how much carbon is actually captured through the ocean pathways is a little bit difficult, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's essentially proven through the other methods like direct air capture or through growing trees. Could you, for context, help us understand, without getting too much into the weeds, make it more conceptual? How do they currently measure on trees and how much carbon is captured in direct air capture? What is that? How do they do that? And then what is what you're trying to do to apply that? And how are you doing that to the ocean?
Sure. Yeah. I think so. They aren't all that directly applicable, right? And so like in terms of, there are lots of organizations doing, MRV and various verification models against, in afforestation, right? And we do not use those as guides. It's a different problem set. It is has this kind of inherently problematic issues that's basically that you aren't encountering within the ocean, but you do encounter a very different problem set, right? That's really about kind of additionality and durability, and can you prove it'll still be there within 30 years? And have you in fact done a thing that will draw carbon from the atmosphere? And so it's a very different problem set from the ocean.
Hey there. Are you building a climate tech business and looking for very specialized talent? Consider reaching out to our sponsors, NextWave Partners. NextWave are experts in talent acquisition, recruitment, and retention across the climate tech, renewables, and ESG spaces globally. So if your team is growing or you're looking to make a career change yourself, feel free to reach out to NextWave at next-wavepartners.com or reach out to one of their consultants directly via their LinkedIn page.
In the case of direct air capture or biochar, bio-oil, that's a pretty similar problem set. Like, you're drawing carbon from the atmosphere, and you can prove it, but it's just easier to solve, because in the case of direct air capture, like you've sucked it out of the air, you've got it, you can measure it, it's within your facility. In the case of biochar, it's a case where you're taking biomass and you are kind of converting it into, but you're doing the paralysis effect, but you've got it under your control. You can measure it. You know how much biomass you're processing, and kind of where it goes, because it's all under your control the whole time. So those are cases where kind of how much carbon you've got, and so you can kind of take credit for it because it's all under your control. So in the ocean case, right, we don't have, in the case of direct ocean capture, as I mentioned, so that's kind of the simplest case within the marine pathways. It's like direct air capture, but you're sucking it directly out of the seawaters, and so how much carbon you've pulled out of the water because you've got it. But then we don't really care about how much you took out of the water. Like that doesn't help us. But so you release it back into the ocean, and there is this equilibrium effect, but that equilibrium effect takes place over weeks and months. And of course, this is ocean waters, and so it's going to travel, over thousands of kilometers, disperse and move over that time. And so you have to be able to kind of quantify, you have to be able to certify, all right, how much of this, how much of this equilibrium effect took place. Like you have to, that's the thing you're trying to get credit for, getting it out of the air. And so how do you do that? And and also kind of what are the requirements? Like what are you required to do? Are you required to kind of track every molecule, which is probably not possible, as it disperses over the course of weeks, and as the thing that you're measuring is the rate at which the water you've altered becomes undistinguishable from the water you haven't touched, right? And so can you even do that, right? This is not, oceans are a very chaotic system, so they're massive fluxes going on all the time, and so that especially as your kind of your perturbed water disperses, it just becomes harder and harder to see at all. But you still have to quantify. You might get downwelled and all your efforts have been wasted, and you haven't in fact removed carbon from the atmosphere. It might not stay near the surface, and so you have to be able to kind of quantify that, model it, and be able to state with confidence, and confidence that's sufficient to the purchasers and to the scientific community and all the interested parties that this is really happening. And so how do you do that?
So how do you do that? Is there,
Yeah.
do you create kind of just put sensors in the ocean and certain things to try and
Yeah. So
measure the general
right.
cloud, I guess, of where it's going?
Yeah. So there's right. So to some extent, the rule books are still being written, right? The kind of answering exactly that problem is kind of what our organization, and of course working with other partner organizations, is trying to address. Like both, how is this best done? What is sufficient? What is necessary? What do you have to do? What don't you have to do? And there's lots of efforts going on in terms of advancing of modeling systems to better understand it, and then as well as advancing of our sensoring capabilities. Of those, I'm personally somewhat skeptical that the sensor approach is ever going to be terribly viable, given the scales that we're operating on, given the amount of ocean, but still, certainly in like outflow situations or other kind of concentrated situations, that sensors will absolutely have a role in establishing your baselines and things like that. And so there's definitely a role for sensors. As well, but actually I think modeling will be more important, and there are kind of papers and models and coarse-grained regional models, and that, so that you can kind of apply them today, as well as as well as they'll be improving in the years to come. And so what we're doing kind of today is saying, all right, what's the models the best available today, but also kind of what are means of kind of recognizing and quantifying this uncertainty, and kind of maybe judging it in appropriately. So that's kind of among the questions that we're exploring here.
Okay, and then one thing I wanted to ask about is, I think I don't know if we necessarily touched on it directly, but there was something we talked about before the show around the durability of capture,
Yeah.
right? So you mentioned trees, if they burn down, it's kind of wasted efforts. Why is the ocean kind of angle more durable in terms of the
Yeah.
capture?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it is. So within our organization, we have kind of 100-year minimum durability standard. So there are pathways like, say, mangroves or seagrass developments that are, coastal, marine pathways of carbon dioxide removal. And we don't work in those pathways. And again, we want them to be successful. Please, do all the seagrass projects, draw the mangroves. They have enormous benefits, but in terms of the problems that we're trying to solve, we can't be confident that the durability numbers are there. That's definitely going to be there within 100 years after the intervention. So yeah, we have this minimum 100-year, and we think of it as like an irreversible standard, right? And so carbon dioxide that is emitted is going to remain in the air for centuries. Okay, so if you have an emission, if you have a drawdown, like if you plant a tree and that tree, burns down within 50 years, well, not only is all the carbon in that tree gone, you've accomplished really nothing. So it's durability is really important within CDR, right? So the state of the drawdown has to be proportional to the size of the problem, right? And so within that, there are kind of different standards that are emerging. So like Frontier Capital has 1,000-year standard. So they are really only interested in pathways where you're able to draw it from the atmosphere and be confident that it has been removed and will stay removed for at least 1,000 years. Some of the pathways that we're looking at, probably biomass primarily, we have 100-year minimum standard for our work. And so, everything that we would be willing to certify, you must be able to show that it can be removed from the atmosphere for at least 100 years. And so we do think that, like, if you can show that, then that is a worthwhile project that, the world should kind of take you up on that if we can do it on scale. That's a good durability for, in terms of what we need and things like that.
Hey there, thanks for listening to this episode. If you made it this far, it's likely that you're enjoying the show, so I wanted to ask your help. If you're enjoying it, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts and share with somebody in the same industry who might find this interesting. And if you're interested in getting summaries of these episodes, go subscribe to our newsletter that comes out on LinkedIn and Substack. Links can be found in the description. Thanks for your help in growing the reach of this show.
So, like in case of biomass, there's in the case of like mineralization or direct ocean capture, those are essentially 1,000-year, 10,000-year standards. Once this equilibrium effect has occurred, it's in the water. You've pulled it from the atmosphere. It's staying in the water. It's not going to go anywhere. Okay. But in a case of like biomass, you've taken a bunch of kelp and you've sunk it to the bottom of the ocean. You've still got this air equilibrium effect to solve for, but then also you've got this biomass that you've sunk at depth somewhere. And so now you have this question of, okay, let's say you put it at 2,000 meters depth. One, how deep did you put it, right? But if you see, you've picked a spot, you're putting it there. What percentage of all the biomass that you've collected are we confident that makes it to that spot? What's the rate of decay that it's going to have down there? And then how can we know that it's not going to be upwelled in 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, right? And kind of all that biomass, all that carbon that you've stored down at the bottom of the ocean is not going to just be upwelled and then resurfaced and sent up into the air, right? And so those are kind of among the problems you need to solve for to kind of make these durability claims, which are essential to any CDR process.
Okay, cool. Could we talk more about building the business? So let's maybe talk about, I guess I'm curious to go back to the beginning. So once you became interested in this problem, how did you go about creating kind of the MVP, and maybe walk us through your model of what you're at now and how you maybe changed to get here along the way? Because that's usually the conception, is like, how can we make an actual viable business out of this?
Right. Yeah. So, and that's been it, so this really only started over the summer, right? In July, I kind of put up the website for the first time and really just started, it was just me and a website. And I was kind of committed to doing this full time. Like that is a commitment that I had made, but it was just me. And saying, hey, you really kind of entered this phase of like, hey, is this something worth doing? And are we addressing a problem that anybody cares about? And the response was quite positive quite quickly. As soon as I kind of put up the website and people say, hey, everybody who's working in marine CDR recognizes that they have this problem, that they need proof of sequestration is their product. And without kind of good standards, without a way of measuring it, without a way of proving it to Frontier, without a way of accessing the carbon markets, they really don't have a business, right? And so very quickly, people kind of came to me without a lot of effort on my part doing outreach and saying, hey, let's talk. Like, what are you doing? How are you going to do it? And there's kind of quite a bit of enthusiasm, to work with us, which is, I've worked at a lot of startup companies, and oftentimes the trick is like getting anybody to care at all about what you're trying to do. And just got a lot of, in this case, that was not the case here. We got a lot of very positive feedback very early saying, hey, this is a real problem. Like, if you can do this, there's something here. And so, and I been pretty aggressive. I was already involved with some of the communities like air miners and work on climate. And so I had kind of a network that was already forming around this work. And so I spent a lot of time just talking to everybody, and that has really continued. I still talk to lots of people all the time. It's kind of very much part of my routine and what I'm doing. Just kind of outreach and conversations. So that early phase of like, hey, is this worth doing? Phase two was, all right, does anybody want to work with us? Can I sign up? I knew I needed some oceanographers who, I'm not an oceanographer. That's not my background. So I knew that would be essential to, being credible within this business. And so began outreach and talking to folks, and went to a conference where kind of a lot of the people within the Marine CDR MRV space happened to be a small group. And met people there and began to recruit people who would be willing to be scientific advisors, be on the team, be interested in working for the company, and be kind of in the group. And again, this is all pre-revenue, pre-funding, but kind of building up a team that is willing to kind of engage with these problems. And then also simultaneously getting customers who are not just willing to express interest, but then willing to say, all right, we'll sign we'll sign up with you, we'll sign a MOU, and choose you as our kind of MRV partner as we proceed. And so kind of looking to you to help us navigate this industry. So yeah, kind of went through the, is this a good idea phase, does anybody want to work with us phase, and both of those going very well. And so now I think we're really at now is okay, now we need to really start to do it phase. We need to kind of prove that we can indeed play the role that we are seeking to play, that we can contribute well. And part of that effort is, of course, attracting investment, getting the resources to be able to fully engage with the team and to play that role, and to draw in additional resources as well. And so that is really where we are now. So we have quite a few. So like my background is in software and technology. This product will have a software component. It will be building this kind of data pipeline is part of what we'll be doing. But in terms of kind of building the system, that hasn't been the focus so far at all. It's really been all around business development. And so now, in terms of, we're now kind of looking to shift gears into much more operational mode, and to really focusing on the methodologies themselves. And so, all right, what does these things look like? And it really is all kind of methodology development, and all this kind of thinking and on paper and building frameworks, but they're theoretical frameworks, they're business frameworks, not software frameworks yet. And there are a couple efforts going on there. So just right before, until very recently, there were essentially no playbooks. Nobody had done an MRV protocol. No one's really published one. And so just 2 weeks ago, Planetary Technologies kind of published their first draft of their MRV protocol for their organization around ocean enhanced alkalinity. And so that is kind of their work. We weren't involved with it, but it is kind of the first step, first draft of a proposal of like what one of these things might look like. And so that's been an important kind of catalytic event, I think, for the industry, and certainly for our organization. And then similarly around that, we are beginning to say, okay, what are the rule books for writing these rule books, right? What should be in these MRV protocols? What should be in there? What should be public? What should be proprietary? How open should they be? Should they be specific to a given organization? Should they be open standards such that somebody else could come along and essentially, if they're doing something similar, then they could apply that same standard? And so that's kind of where we are now, in the starting of the writing of the rule book, for the writing of the rule books, as well as taking, we now have a sample and evaluating that sample and saying, all right, where do we think this is well done? Where do we think this is sufficient? Where can it be made more robust? How does this differ from our vision of how things can be done? And also kind of where can we supplement what's already been done there? But it's very, very early. I mean, this, Planetary thing just came out 2 weeks ago, and the first drafts of the framework are still being kind of written now. And so, so we're just now kind of shifting into this, much more operational, much more spending more time thinking about the methodologies themselves.
Okay, interesting. And then, so when you set out, obviously you wanted to make sure that there was an interest. I think it's worth noting and pointing out for people listening that it sounds as though you did it the right way, where you made sure there's a need for your product or potential
Mhm.
product, and then figured out what the product would look like before building it. Many people go the reverse,
Yeah, yeah, right.
build the product, see if somebody wants it. Um, but I guess you mentioned this is very early space, but
Yeah,
would you mind commenting how your model works and
yeah,
how it works compared to others in the space, if there
yeah.
are others that you can compare against?
Yeah, so there aren't many that we can compare against. It is kind of we are kind of first movers within the space. Until now, most organizations have been of necessity building their own internal MRV organizations. If you're Planetary Technologies, if you're Running Tide, you've had to build your own kind of internal MRV capabilities, and then you have to try to explain to each individual purchaser why yours is necessary and appropriate, right? And so now you get a system where you have multiple people that are doing similar things, having to solve all these same problems, and we'll have slightly different solutions to each of them, which is problematic, as well as having to develop their own kind of internal expertise and capabilities. So the this is a really important role, to somebody kind of create these common rule books to have kind of a shared framework, a shared rule set that everyone can work through. Um, and I forget what was your question. It was
Yeah, how does the model of your
oh
business
yeah,
work?
okay,
The
yeah. So
financial model, yeah.
so kind of entering into this space. Um, it's kind of a consulting service. It's kind of a software service, right? It's kind of bringing together this expertise, but it is also kind of a very nascent shape, right? And so we have kind of an unusual business model in that for these methodology development services, for the software development services, we don't charge any money. We kind of offer all those at no cost. And then our business model is based around taking a small percentage, it ranges from like 2 to 5%, off the certified credits on the back end. And so, this is intentionally designed to make it easy for organizations to work with us, especially very, very early organizations who are probably seeking money themselves, or maybe even coming up with a story to tell the investors and things like that. Um, so make it very, very easy for them to come and work with us. It makes it very easy for us to build a very broad network kind of across the industry of people who, are willing to sign up with us, willing to share information with us. And so that we definitely want to play this kind of collaborative role of finding these best practices together. And then from there, the plan is to establish these rule books, get consensus around their viability and get kind of an industry acceptance around that this is an appropriate rule set. And then so we'll define all the data that needs to be collected to both the kind of the carbon compliance and the environmental compliance. We haven't really talked about environmental risk, but that's a big part of what we're doing. And so be able to kind of define all the data that needs to be collected, build the systems, the data standards under which, the data, here's how it's going to look after you've collected it all, and then be able to package that up and send it to a market, right? Or make it available to a purchaser. So that's kind of the product set that we're offering. And so our model is based around, we will kind of build all that at no cost. And then as this industry grows, as it scales, as it gets up into the megaton and the gigaton scales, which we all need to do, and it must necessarily to do if we're going to meet any of our climate goals, that we would then share in that success. And so we've got, we're kind of a small team that's working early and building a broad partnership, but really looking toward this future.
Okay, got it. Makes sense. And then can you talk to us about the challenges of or the process of doing the fundraise? What have you been able to achieve so far?
Yeah.
What have been typically the objections? What have you learned from it?
Yeah. So we've been doing it relatively short amount of time. And really only kind of late December and then the last few months we've kind of got our pieces in place, got our story together, got our partner list, and started to raise funding. And it has been a challenge. I think anybody who's kind of done fundraising before would say, well, you've only been at this a couple of months, you haven't really started to fail yet. But as of yet, we don't have we have not brought in that kind of first all investment. We do not yet currently have that first commitment. And some of the feedback that we're seeing is, we don't fit a lot of typical investment thesis, right? So even our premise is that this is a necessary and gigantic industry that's going from zero to the size of the entire fossil fuel industry in the next couple of decades. This is going to explode into existence, and it's going to happen in the marine space, and MRV is critical to making it all go, right? So our kind of our business thesis is that if you can be this early trusted partner and play essential catalytic role, then this is an enormous opportunity to be get. But it is in the future. But it's a few years away, but only a few. I think it's going to happen, really quite quickly, and then grow rapidly from there. So that's kind of our thesis, and so we are definitely optimized for kind of building towards that future, building up this partnership network, building, playing this kind of central role in terms of our business thesis. But in doing so, right? So we have these kind of we'll work with anybody for free early business model, right? Which really does not fit within lots of people's investment thesis. And they're like, well, if this is valuable, then shouldn't they be paying you for it? And also, like, aren't you kind of a consulting company, which is not the kind of thing that they're interested in investing in? But of course, our business model is the opposite of that. Also, we're not really a deep tech company, right? So within the CDR, the MRV space, right, there are people doing model innovation, there are people doing sensor innovation. We're not really doing either of those things. We will look to incorporate the best models, we'll look to incorporate the best tools, but we actually think both the opportunity for impact and financial opportunity is really in kind of is in terms of getting the biggest partnership network and being your partner with them, is in the business side. But again, that doesn't really kind of fit within most people's investment thesis. With lots of people will talk to us like, well, we're a deep tech company. You don't really fit that. And so fair enough. And so it is. So it's a curious position. I think a lot of people recognize that. So like we have huge supply side demand, right? All the suppliers are like, hey, we really want to work with you. We have huge demand side demand. All the marketplaces are like, yeah, we are a marketplace without product, right now, because there's no supply. And so we would love, to have a certification partner that can, people come to us and say, hey, we'd like to sell you some, seaweed that we've, carbon sequestered via this process. And markets are like, we don't know what to do with you. We need somebody to send them to. And so, they are very interested in working with us as a partner, as a aggregator of these projects. And so we've got huge supply side, huge demand side, huge potential, absolutely necessary space within the industry, well, for an industry that must exist. But still, like, it is early, it's nebulous, and we don't really fit most people's kind of investment thesis. Like they're like, we don't know what to do with you.
Yeah,
so that's kind of some of the feedback we're getting, right?
I can see it being relatively difficult. I would say, it may be keen to understand if you spend time looking at, hey, okay, here's the feedback we've gotten. Now let's kind of reverse engineer this
Yeah.
to fit into the thesis, because obviously you got to do what you got to do to get the dollars, right?
Yeah.
But kind of curious. So, given that you work with a lot of these people doing the actual science of capturing carbon through the ocean,
Mm-hmm.
any advice or things that you've seen speaking with a lot of people in the space to those organizations that are, doing the actual science? What, any advice to them, things that you see that they typically overlook or not thinking about the commercials, perhaps? Just any general tips there that you would suggest?
I mean, I think that let's see. Yeah. So I think each organization is different, right? So some of the organizations that we're speaking with have very sophisticated internal MRV operations, right? But even then, we're definitely in an R&D phase. So many of their efforts have been really focused around, proving that this can be done, that it works at a lab scale, at a and that and also the environmental impacts, right? Proving it can be done safely and evaluating that. And that's absolutely correct and appropriate. And, that's, where people should be directing their efforts at this stage. And so but the next question that's kind of but there are other people who are much less sophisticated at all. They're like, hey, we're just growing this seaweed. We need, measuring is your job. Like, we just want to do it. And then you'll be our verification partner. And we're like, okay, but, we'll play that role as well. But even within the relatively sophisticated organizations, they naturally are kind of coming from this oceanographic mindsets. And so, the notion of kind of writing what are essentially commercial standards is quite different from a scientific standard, right? And so, the standard of proof, like, all right, is this really a physical phenomenon? Is this really happening? Is quite high, but now in most cases it's reasonably well established. And so the next question is, all right, what is what's the commercial standard? What's the burden of proof in a commercial context? And so there, you can do things like quantify uncertainty and offer discount rates and deal with other kind of market things that the financial industry is absolutely familiar with. But the scientific community is really not. It's just kind of not how you think. Kind of how do you kind of quantifying uncertainty so you can put a volume and a dollar number next to it. It's kind of like not what oceanographers do, right? And so that is kind of this intersection of mindsets that is. And then another kind of interesting dynamic at play is, so I come from the startup world, the entrepreneurial world, which definitely has this kind of fail faster, iterate rapidly, kind of experiment and try things out, mentality. And I think that mentality is very useful given the scale of the problem and the pace that we need to address it. But also certainly within the scientific community, academic community, that is not how they work at all. It's very much around methodical, kind of adding strata, a layer upon layer of information on top of information and evidence on top of evidence, and you're kind of contributing your bit. And there's certainly people who kind of have frustration with that, but there's certainly lots of instincts around that, and especially in the case like this, where there absolutely is, a lot of important ongoing research and development around these key areas. And there's a question of whether or not that should be kind of a prerequisite to moving forward with these things, or if we can kind of move forward with kind of what we have today and then incorporate science and the methods and the models, as they improve over the years to come, which is very much our philosophy, but not universally shared at all.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I guess I share the sentiment. I mean, it's difficult to. I'm not the kind of person who wants to have things perfectly figured out before I start. I usually go off a gut feeling of, hey, I think based on these couple pieces of evidence, it looks like there's something to be had here. Let's go, let's go try it out.
Right.
Okay, interesting. And then just one thing I wanted to understand, I think it'd be interesting for people is when you actually maybe back up a little bit. When you decided that you want to do something in the space, what, I guess, besides just being motivated to help fix the problem, what did it really take for you to kind of make the leap to go say, you know what, I'm going to go full-time entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, mine is kind of an interesting case in that I had kind of, made the switch in my head, like, this is what I wanted to do. I kind of, applied for a couple of jobs and was exploring starting companies with various folks, and very much was planning to do this. But what actually happened in my case is that I was laid off. The company I was working for, was doing some restructuring, and I got some severance, but didn't have a job anymore. But I was always, there's another group I was talking to at that time. I kind of thought I would have quit by now, essentially, and so I was really quite pleased when it happened. I was like, okay, great. I'm gonna go. I know what I want to do. I'm just gonna go do that. And then even though that group that didn't end up coming together, I was like, all right, well, that doesn't matter. Like I know, I already know what I want to do, so now I'm just gonna do it. And so I was definitely kind of pushed into it by events. I mean, I could have not done that, but there was kind of a natural, like, all right, this is it, now or never. The universe talking to me. But I spend a lot of time now. I'm on like an expert office hours program with the work on climate, and so I'm spent a lot of time just talking to people who are looking to get into the space, who are interested in getting in, and I talked to lots of very talented, very capable, very well-paid people who've been very successful in their careers and are good at what they do and can get paid to do it, and they want to work in the climate, and they're finding it hard to get in. And I see that, and that the space is new. There's a lot of activity. There's a lot of money coming in. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of talent coming at it. But it is hard to find an entry point. The companies that are working on it, a lot of them, especially within the CDR space, which is really the only one I know at all well, that the people who are working there are small. They don't really need marketing or sales right now. They really just kind of need a few oceanographers and or other kind of related personnel. Um, and so yeah, it's kind of a frustratingly difficult space to get into. But one piece of advice I do have is that, so round about a year ago now, I was kind of exploring the space. I went to the Learn Ocean channel on Work on Climate and like said, hey, who wants to talk about this stuff? And just a few people joined. I think there were 3 people, including myself, on the initial call. And I was like, great, but it was a great discussion. I was like, all right, who, let's make this a regular thing. Does anybody organize this kind of conversation? And the answer was, well, no, but you can if you want. And so I was like, okay, I will. And so, I kind of started doing that. And, that was really like about a year ago now, right? And so my website just went up like last summer, right? And so now here we are, just a few months into, my journey. And I'm already kind of regarded as a grizzled veteran within the space, right? I'm kind of like a go-to person that people talk to. I speak on panels and things like that. And so, you can, there's so much work to be done across so many vectors, right? I've only been looking at CDR and specifically marine CDR, but within decarbonization, within green energy, within mitigation, within carbon dioxide removal, different pathways, there's so much work to be done. And so anyone really can kind of plant a flag, find a corner that interests them. It's probably be an unexplored corner, and within a very short time you can be a major, one of the foremost experts. We're full of a world of people who are both kind of woefully underqualified to do this and move it forward, but are also probably the best people on the planet. Since because nobody else has really explored it. And there's so much that's new, so much that's going on. And so you can definitely like do that. There's an opportunity to do that right now. Everything is so much kind of under construction, so much work to be done, so much to be figured out, that if you can kind of pick a corner and plant yourself there and say, talk to people about it, you can quickly become, an important person within this space. Now, can you get paid to do that? Like that's, yeah, I haven't cracked that nut yet, but there's a lot going on, and there's definitely a huge opportunity there.
Mhm. Yeah, I do think it's quite interesting that I feel is a good and a bad thing in some ways that
Yeah,
from a talent perspective, it is difficult to break in. So some people say, screw it, I'm going to do my own thing.
yeah.
And all of these interesting companies are popping up. And again, a lot of them won't succeed, or a lot of them will get, purchased or kind of swallowed up by other companies. But I still think it's overall very good for many people to be looking at it from different angles
Oh
rather
yeah,
than them all trying to go join, one mega company that's already got some things figured out. So I
yeah,
do think it's quite fascinating, and it is interesting to see how it doesn't necessarily take an entire 40-year career to become an expert in one of these things, because there's such little information that you have to go find it. And you just find the information, what's out there, and then you add to it through deeper research and talking to people and everything and pulling together. One thing I wanted to ask, I think your model is interesting for this particular question, which is, you're a technologist, you're a tech person, but you're coming into kind of a science space, right? So
yeah.
you obviously had to surround yourself with these oceanographers, as you mentioned. Could you talk about how and maybe the challenges around doing this? Any tactical advice or to other people when they're in a similar situation where they're like, "Hey, we know there's a problem, and
Mhm.
now I need to find the experts to help me solve this problem because I'm not, technically qualified for this item."
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely a challenge that I've faced. And yeah, so one, start by approaching it humbly, right? Acknowledge, that these people are experts in a field that you are not, right? And so that's a good point. But also, don't be overly cowed by it, right? Like I'm never going to write an oceanographic paper, but I can read one, right? And I can kind of mostly understand it, or I can mostly abstract it, or I can certainly kind of discuss it and think about the implications of it, with an oceanographer who will have a deeper understanding, right? These are things that I can contribute. And so, yeah, both kind of recognizing your own limitations, but then also, um, also, don't be afraid of engaging with the experts, right? And don't be afraid to kind of contribute to discussions, especially where you do have kind of relative expertise, right? So in this case, we really are talking about the intersection of the science with market forces and market standards. And so it's not a purely scientific question at all, right? We have to be able to kind of understand the phenomenon and be able to express them in kind of ratios and areas of probability, and be able to find, okay, what is the appropriate model and how is it best applied? Like, these are all challenges that we need to confront, but but it requires necessarily a cross-disciplinary effort and a cross-disciplinary set of skills and expertise and mindsets. And so being able to kind of navigate that, build that, work collaboratively, is a big deal. And then another thing to consider is that even within science, people are relatively stratified. So like within oceanography, there is chemical oceanography, there's biological oceanography, there's physical oceanography, there's paleooceanography. So even within even within a subset of oceanography, there are many different specialties. And even within each of those specialties, people have their own areas of focus, areas of expertise. So even somebody who is an expert, has a doctorate and has been working in this field for 20 years, still they only have many cases, a pretty limited visibility, especially among these problems that are not well studied, right? In terms of, there's a SI community that's been looking at, like, how do we measure these carbon fluxes within the ocean from a different perspectives. But still, there's a lot of value of just kind of bringing together these synthesis of the different viewpoints that may not naturally happen even within the academic world very much. So there's certainly opportunities there as well.
Yeah, I think this is quite interesting. This is a theme that's come up quite a few times in the show, is that some of the most interesting companies, or most successful in some cases, come out of someone who is not an expert, who can look at things kind of with a fresh set of eyes, if you will, but pulls together the experts in each vertical and then asks them to work together, right? And I think
Yeah.
there's a lot. This is just business in general, but I think in particular for climate solutions, it's quite interesting to look at it that way. Is that when people, they're in their lane, but maybe they consider how could these two lanes merge. And it seems as though it's also a theme that ever since the beginning of people trying to solve climate change, the real issue at the beginning was there wasn't commercial viability behind it. And as soon as commercial viability entered the stage and there could be money made, it immediately exploded, right? I think that's to me what what catalyzed the explosion of this movement, especially in the past couple of years here. Um, we're running out of time, but I have a couple other things I want to go over, which is, are there any comments or thoughts you have on what corporates or governments can do or should be doing to help kind of spur along this particular space?
Yeah, there's definitely a funding gap, right? But it is kind of this kind of small venture scale funding, right? And so we, as an organization that has this kind of dual mandate of, like, one, have an impact, fight climate change, right? We want to play the central catalytic role and make this industry come into existence so that there can be a CDR industry, and so that industry can combat climate, right? We also want to build a successful business, but it is, these are kind of separate and related goals, right? And so the venture world right now is probably the best equipped to, like, evaluate, are you building a successful scalable business? Like, they're the ones who have developed that expertise, they've got their models and methodologies. But even the most kind of impact focused venture capitalist is still, like, they got to make their returns on their money. They have to be focused on the growth. And so they're, assessing impact opportunities. It's not really kind of what they do, right? And it's not really clear who would be doing that, who could be doing that, right? There certainly are philanthropic foundations, but they're even harder to get access to. There aren't as many of them, or at least I haven't had any luck getting access to them. And so models of funding for innovations, for speculative innovations, that's something that I don't really see, right? And especially for either for nonprofits who are people who are like, no, we don't really want to make money. We just want to, move this forward. But or for organizations like ours that have this kind of dual mandate, like, well, if we catalyze this industry and comes into being and we play a central role in that, and even if we don't, get super wealthy doing so, like, that would be kind of a home run for me, right? But that's not the venture model, kind of by necessity. And so that is certainly an area that I see as a big gap. Going forward, there will be enormous roles to play around, like the purchasing, as we get into the gigaton scales of removal, there will be questions around, who's going to pay for this and things like that. But I actually don't, like, I'm not worried about that now at all. I'm much more worried about like can we do it? And then I expect it will be paid for, right? But there's certain, you can see like the recent IRA Act with the 45Q initiative, like that's a directly giving money to carbon removal, trying to finance carbon removal. But that is just focused on direct air capture, right? And so like people looking at us on the policy level saying, hey, we are trying to achieve precisely the same goals that you're trying to incentivize with a lot of dollars. But the government shouldn't care about which methodology is used. They just should care that it's that it's sound, that it's working, it's meeting the goal, right? So I think there's a lot of work to be done, kind of education, but a lot of that is just kind of how new this whole industry is, right? I'm not surprised that no one's writing regulations around marine CDR because it doesn't really exist yet. It's not even we are kind of at the forefront of like trying to write the rule book. So I'm not surprised that there's no, senator staffer who's on it, right? I think it will necessarily kind of come from the private sector, come from initiatives, groups like Frontier, who's like, hey, here's this money, here's the standard, like meet that standard. Like I think that's
Yeah.
definitely how it has to start, and that is going and proceeding very rapidly right now, as these things go. So,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I'd say obviously I don't think legislators are necessarily super proactive. I mean, you look at the
yeah, right.
voluntary carbon market space; it's been around for over 20 years, basically,
Mm,
and there's just finally getting some things around it.
yeah,
Um, but it's also interesting you talk about the funding gap. I'd be curious to see if there's any types of models that pop up where kind of philanthropists create VCs essentially,
yeah, right.
because there's obviously these areas where it's like if you look at, for example, it's obviously all the rage right now. OpenAI, right, was started as a
Mm,
nonprofit, right? And it was, hey, we need to do this. We need to advance society, so we're going to put a bunch of money into it and advance it. And then it turns into something that's profitable, right? And turns
mm,
into a real business. And I don't know, maybe there's a model for that somewhere inside of climate.
yeah.
Certainly would be a good area to be targeting those efforts. So final things here, just to close off. What are your asks to people? Anything specifically you're looking for? Where should people reach out to you? And any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, let's see. So, in terms of reaching out to me, I'm pretty easy to get to. I think Ben Swainbank at oceanidmrv.com. Hopefully we'll post that somewhere. I really enjoy talking to people, anybody who's at all interested in what we're doing. Reach out, happy to chat. And I'm also in the Learn Ocean channel on work on climate. I kind of manage that channel. We've got a regular call, so we'd love to have people kind of jump in and talk to us there. I'm also on the expert office hours, also on work on climate. People can just kind of sign up and meet with a group and talk to me there. So I really, I consider kind of outreach a big portion of what I do. It helps me, but also kind of helps me help the industry. And I really enjoy it. So yeah, please do reach out. That's kind of number one. I love to talk to folks. And then of course, yeah, we are a pre-funding, pre-revenue company, which has enormous potential and is working in a very exciting place. And so we're obviously happy to talk to anybody who wants to learn more about that and perhaps has the capacity and the interest in helping out. For
Absolutely.
sure.
Very good. I really appreciate you coming on the show, Ben. This has been great. Pretty fascinating, interesting stuff, and definitely a topic I've not really dived into on the show. So thank you for coming on and looking forward to seeing what you continue to do.
No, my pleasure. Well, thank you, Silas. Yeah, it's a great time.